Sweeping new tariffs signed this week in Washington. We'll speak with an expert on how soon we could see the impacts on prices that you pay. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray.
And I'm Jamie DeLine. President Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs on Wednesday on nearly all U.S. trade partners.
The president said the tariffs are designed to boost domestic manufacturing and bring jobs back to the U.S.
The tariffs include a baseline 10% tariff on goods, a 34% tax on imports from China, and 20% on the European Union, along with a 25% duty on all foreign cars. The plan originally included a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, but that was undone by a bipartisan vote late Thursday.
Now, the White House says that the tariff policy will bring in hundreds of billions of dollars of new revenue.
We're going to start being smart, and we're going to start being very wealthy again.
As for prices and what the American public can expect, they can expect price stability. They can expect to buy American. It's a patriotic thing to do. And most importantly, they can expect their wages to go up.
Several countries have announced they will raise tariffs in response to the plan. Opponents of the tariffs argue they will negatively impact costs for average customers. Joining us to give additional insight on the impact these tariffs might have is Sylvan Lane, business editor at the new website, The Hill. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
So first and foremost, what is a tariff for people that don't know?
Sure. So in its simplest form, a tariff is a tax on imports. If you or you're a company buying any good from abroad that is subject to a tariff, that means that you have to pay an additional tax on that whenever you go to pick it up at the port or wherever you're getting that product from. There's various ways that companies and people adjust for them, but at their core, a tariff is a tax that the government charges on somebody who buys a product from abroad.
I know the president just recently announced that, April 2nd was Liberation Day. Do you think that this is going to be beneficial for the economy?
So it's hard to know with any certainty how this is all going to affect the economy in both the short and the long term. But what we've seen from, most economists, most trade experts, is a lot of concern and fear about what this is going to do to American households and businesses. These new import taxes that the president has imposed equal about $600 billion per year in new taxes that are either going to have to be paid by American households or businesses. Now, businesses have various ways of adjusting for the tariffs. Sometimes foreign suppliers will cut their prices because they don't want to lose too much business. But the majority of people that I've spoken to are very worried about what this will do to the economy.
And how soon can we see these impacts?
When it comes to short-term impacts, we're already seeing the stock market suffer its worst losses since 2020. Now that doesn't have a huge impact on the whole economy in and of itself. But if you're somebody who was looking to retire soon, you're looking at potentially thousands of dollars less in retirement savings already. Over time, we might start to see this translate into higher prices or limited supply of certain goods abroad. The overall inflation rate could continue to go up. At the same time, we may see more companies from abroad make announcements that they want to build factories in the United States to avoid these tariffs. But of course, it takes a long time to build a factory, build the equipment for it, hire people, and start making products. So some of these longer-term transitions that the president really wants to see may take months, if not years, for people to truly notice.
And what industries in particular do you think will see this impact?
So the president's tariffs on foreign autos and auto parts are one of the things that will probably see the biggest and most immediate impact if he goes through with his full plan. Many U.S. auto companies build their cars not only in the United States, but often with parts or components from plants in Canada and Mexico. And one car part could cross the border, 10 to 12 times even. So those tariffs could end up driving up the cost of cars pretty significantly. There's also the issue of retaliation retaliation against American products. We've already seen China come out today with a 34% tariff on U.S. goods, and that's going to hit American farmers, particularly soybean and pork farmers, very hard because Americans have traditionally sold a lot of soybeans and crops to countries like China, but with those tariffs, they're going to become a lot more expensive now.
And based on what I've been reading, it sounds like the highest tariffs are actually on China.
That's right. So we already had tariffs of 20% imposed by President Trump during his first administration. Former President Biden continued those. And now there's an additional 34% tariff on top of that. So that means that every Chinese product that isn't exempted from this in some way or another is going to be 54% more expensive potentially to import to the United States. We could see that in electronics, iPhones, clothing, a wide range of things that Americans buy for their everyday lives.
And what do you think about these tariffs, and what are something that the average American household, doesn't necessarily get yet or understand when it comes to this?
It's a great question because American households, average folks are looking at the news and wondering what this is going to mean for them. And our challenge as reporters is, translating that. The president has offered mixed messages about whether or not he's willing to ease these tariffs or not. There's a lot at play and a lot at stake right now. So unfortunately, there aren't many clear answers for Americans. But, this would be a good time for anybody to take stock of their financial situation, see what they have in savings, take a look at their expenses, and think of ways that they might be able to figure out how to feel more comfortable or prepared for any uncertainty that comes ahead.
All right, we'll have to leave it right there. Sylvan Lane, thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik will remain in Congress after a decision from the Trump administration. How will her position change politics at the state and national level? We'll speak with an expert when we return.
Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. We are continuing to track the fallout following the Trump administration's decision to keep Congresswoman Elise Stefanik in Congress and not take a position in the cabinet.
The North Country Congresswoman releasing a statement early in the week giving her reaction, explaining the importance of the Republican position in Congress.
She called the House Republican majority, quote, historically slim, and went on to say the political realities are what they are, and it's very important that we have every single vote in the House. So I'm proud to be stepping up as a team to support the American people to get this done and to continue to support President Trump.
Joining us now to give additional insight on the impacts this decision regarding Stefanik will have is Morgan Hook, a partner at Blue Jacket Strategies. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about this position that she's no longer having. She's now stuck in Congress. What do you see going forward?
Well, so I think it is, what is most interesting about this is I think it is very telling about how Republicans feel about their very tenuous hold on the majority in Congress. This is one of the smallest margins for a majority in the history of Congress, at least in like 100 years. And they clearly felt that the chances of a special election, even the chance that a Democrat could win the special election would cut into that majority that they had even more. So, they said all the right things, and she said she was going to be a team player, and Donald Trump said she was going to be a team player. But at the end of the day, she had this job that she very clearly wanted and was gone, basically, except for a few votes. And now she's back. All of her leadership positions are gone. She was the number 3 ranked Republican in the House last year. That's gone. That's not going to be given back to her. Committee assignments, things like that. And not to mention, she goes from being the UN ambassador in New York City and Brussels, Belgium, to back to Glens Falls and Queensbury for cold New York winters. Like, that's a dramatic shift for someone as you think about it as like an individual to have to take. And so it'll be interesting to see what she decides to do next.
Morgan, as much as she might want to get mad at the president or Mike Johnson or somebody in D.C., sources were saying, they're always anonymous sources, but sources were kind of leaking to the national media that part of this happened to Stefanik because the New York Republicans couldn't kind of get their act together, where had they said, okay, here's our person, if all those committee chairs, it was kind of a group of county chairs all had to agree, this is our guy or this is our gal, and they're going to do great, DC would have felt better about it. But there was so much bickering and so many hats in the ring that it sort of made them nervous about, do you guys even know what you're doing, who you're running?
I don't think that there's any question. To me, the simplest answer here is there's the one candidate, Constantino, I think his name is, the sign guy, it didn't appear that he was going to get the nomination. And in a special election, as I'm sure your viewers know, in a special election, there's no primary, there's no voting. County chairs just select a candidate. And it seemed, from what we were hearing, that Dan Steck was going to be that candidate. And then the sign guy said, well, I don't care, I'm going to run a third party. And if he had done that, if a Republican was running as the Republican nominee, a Democrat's running and then you have a third person who is a hardcore Trump supporter, firebrand, then the Republicans would have lost that race. There is no question that they would have lost that race if that scenario had played out. So I think you're right. I think DC looked at this and said, we got to stop this because we're going to lose if that guy doesn't follow orders and sits out the election. We're going to lose, and we're going to lose this seat. So I think that's absolutely why they decided to do it. And I think, she probably understands that. It's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's not that they did this to her. They did it because they were worried about their margins in the House.
And based on what I read, it sounds like the president wants a position of leadership for Elise Stefanik.
Yeah, I mean, she has been a very, very loyal soldier for Donald Trump for a number of years. She was one of the first people that he picked to get a cabinet position when he won in November. So I have no doubt that they'll try to do something for her at the end. I think what is interesting is, what does this mean for 2026? She clearly was someone who wasn't interested in being in Congress anymore, took this appointment. Now she's back in Congress. Does she run for re-election? What does that mean for the race in 2026? I do think that the dynamics of a special election are very, very different in this seat. Dynamics of a special election are very different than they would be in a regular election when you've got 400 some odd members of Congress running. The attention is spread out over the entire country. A special election, like we've talked about before, all of the attention was going to be on this race. Money was going to pour in. That would help a Democrat running in this race. I think in 2026, it goes back to being very much favored by a Republican. I think if Elise Stefanik chooses to run again in 2026, she will win. But does she choose to run again? Does the sign guide say, I don't care who, if I don't get the nomination in 2026, I'm running third party? And again, if that happens, if there are two Republicans running against one Democrat in this race, the Democrats are going to win this seat, and they should not win this seat.
You also, we can't discount, I don't mean this in a negative way, but ego. We're all human beings. It wasn't like Trump, it was inauguration day, I believe, where he said, I want her to be my UN ambassador. And then it wasn't 2 days later this happened. She had mentally and personally and with her family, she must have already kind of, the train left the station with this job. And now you got to go back. You wonder, when she was 30, it was a dream to be a congressperson, but now you're like 10, 12 years later, does she need more as a person saying, look, I love Queensbury, I love Glens Falls, but I can't go back to this. I got to be moving forward with my career. So I wonder if she's not, does she win one more and then move on, or does she even run again?
Well, so that's just it. And we've watched Elise Stefanik throughout her political career. I think it is safe and not necessarily partisan for me to say she's incredibly ambitious. This is someone who wants to rise in the ranks. She rose in the ranks in the House. She, built this women's caucus and has been supporting other Republican women to run for office. She wanted that UN ambassadorship that is usually seen as a stepping stone to something else. She's been talked about as someone who could be a VP candidate, possible presidential candidate at some point. And yeah, going back to Congress in upstate New York, not to discredit upstate New York, it's where I live. Yeah. But that's not where you don't launch a presidential campaign from just running another term in Congress. So I do think that her ambition will determine what it is that she wants to do next. I would be very surprised if she just decides to be, one, I also think that Republicans are likely to lose the majority in 2026. That is cyclical. That just, regardless of what Donald Trump does, although a lot of his moves this week I think will prove to be fairly unpopular, which will hurt Republicans in the House. But even if that isn't the case, these things tend to go back and forth. We've talked about how close the margin is. Is this somebody who really wants to be in the minority in the House for another 2 years, and then to do what? So I do think it's a very open question. Is there a leadership position she can run for in the House? Maybe. Is there some other appointed position? Maybe when this race isn't a special election and it can be 2026, she can get a cabinet position at that point. But I do think that's very much on the table, and it's something for us to all be watching.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Morgan, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, guys.
Current New York City Mayor Eric Adams announcing he'll be running for re-election as an independent. When we come back, we'll hear from Pix 11 reporter Henry Rossoff on the impact this could have on the mayoral race.
If you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X, formerly known as Twitter, at WTEN.
City Mayor Eric Adams making a decision to run as an independent in this crowded mayoral race. Joining us now to give some insight on the decision, reporter Henry Rossoff, Pix 11 down in the city. Henry, thanks for coming on. Is this really, Henry, about the polling? I saw a recent poll where he was around 8% compared to Andrew Cuomo's 30%. Is it just a position where he can't get the Democratic side anyway?
The mayor says that it's not necessarily about the polls, but certainly that doesn't help. That was our poll from last week. It showed him running not even second, but third to former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's approaching around 40% of support, really kind of running away with this Democratic primary in the polls at this point. What the mayor has said when we follow up and pressed and asked him, why not just switch to running as a Republican, or why couldn't you just campaign for the Democratic nomination? He says it was really this federal corruption case, which was dropped with prejudice, meaning it cannot come back just a few days ago, and the mayor made the announcement just the following day. So he says now this is no longer hanging over his head. He can make his case to all voters, but he would argue there's not enough time to make his case to just Democratic voters with the 2.5 months he has remaining.
You know, if FBI agents suddenly swarmed any one of our houses, even after the whole thing was over, all the neighbors would remember it. He's under this federal investigation that now goes away. Has the damage already been done to his reputation because of the investigation itself and the fact that it was President Trump who said, let's take it away?
That's quite likely that the damage has already been done. That's an apt observation. And certainly his campaign opponents say this is not just the end, it is the beginning. They would say this is just evidence. Brad Lander, the comptroller specifically, Scott Stringer, Zohran Mamdani, the assemblyman who's making a lot of noise in this race all of a sudden, all say this is just evidence that he colluded with President Trump to make his case go away. And if you're aligned with President Trump, to be frank, based on the electoral politics of this city, which voted for, President Biden in the last election by 65 to 70%. You're just not going to win this race. Now, interestingly, former Governor Cuomo was asked to comment on the mayor's decision to run as an independent and the dropped charges, and he kind of pulled his punches. And the math there is somewhat obvious. Cuomo is a moderate Democrat appealing to voters of color. That really is Mayor Eric Adams' lane. So he doesn't want to offend those voters or really, dance on the theoretical grave of Mayor Adams. But certainly that is the underpinning here.
Yeah, and I'm curious, are people surprised how well Cuomo's polling, despite the scandals that kind of chased him out of office? Or has the world spun enough around where we're now in a position where I'm seeing editorials saying, he might not be perfect, but he might be the tough guy we need to take on Trump? Is that kind of where he's playing his role?
Down here, it's less about taking on Trump, although that's certainly one of the themes of this election, and more about this sort of feeling of crime, chaos, and disorder. He's running on a message that he's going to fix the city. And even though crime stats are objectively falling and a number of people who are homeless on the streets and subways are being connected with services, it does have this feeling of chaos. I can tell you as an everyday subway rider, I see at least one person on either coming or going here to our Pix 11 studios who is in mental crisis and is frankly frankly behaving in a scary, if not threatening way to fellow passengers. And that is the daily reality in New York. So again, even though the crime numbers are falling and the mayor says, hey, just look at the numbers, look at the numbers, look at the numbers, the feel here is this sense of disorder, and that perhaps former Governor Cuomo can be the one to fix that due to his extensive leadership history.
All right. Well, we wish you a safe subway ride after you're done working today, heading home for the weekend. Henry Rossoff, thanks for coming on. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you got a comment or story idea, please tell us about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. We are also on X, formerly known as Twitter, at WTEN. Finally, at Empire State Weekly, the Regional Food Bank of Northeastern New York is scrambling to find some new funding after the federal government cut $1.5 billion for federal food programs. That translates to 8 million pounds of essential produce.
The Regional Food Bank explaining this could impact their ability to feed some 350,000 people. As local food banks and school districts remain committed to bringing food to those in need, we'll be sure to keep an eye on how severe this could be and bring the latest analysis.
For now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray.
And I'm Jamie DeLine. We'll see you here next week.
Don't you forget, you can watch this show all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 TV stations across the great state of New York.